Hiya folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things, and this week I made Santa, but like with a cannon firing angry elves, holding knives. Of course, if I'm making an elf launching cannon wielding Santa, odds are he's not entirely sane, so the first step in this seasonal adventure will be making a slightly insane Santa head. I'll start by poking some little divots to fit some big crazy eyes into before marking out his mouth, which will, of course, be open in a crazy Santa laugh. Then I can fit a great big nose in place between the eyes before building out the cheeks and really exaggerating the general shape of the cheekbones, as well as making sure one eye is squinting in an immediately recognizably crazy way. I'll then add some nostrils to the nose before building up the cheeks and jowls, since Santa is traditionally on the slightly rotund side of the spectrum, and I can start to clean up some of the seams, and this jolly old lunatic is starting to look appropriately insane. With the general shape of the head mostly figured out, I can work my way down into Santa's mouth, where I'll fit in a tongue and slop some white wormy dealies in place above and below that I can carve some teeth into. Then once I've given the teeth some adequately toothy detail, I can slap a last bit of clay onto the teeth to create the gums, and it's on to making his big girthy neck. I'll make sure he's got a big old thick slab of flap to support his head, adding lots of wrinkles all the way around. Then it's into the oven to bake while I get to work making some much smaller but equally insane elf heads. I'll make these heads in much the same way by adding some oversized eyes to a teeny tiny head-shaped blob of clay and marking out the mouth. However, this time instead of a crazy laugh, I just want all the elves to be bloodthirsty, so I'll settle on gritted teeth and furrowed brows. Otherwise, it's just a case of adding little lumps of clay around the cheeks and eyes and nose until I've got a roughly adequate amount of padding and detail, at which point I can start smoothing and cleaning it up before slipping a tiny white ghost in between the lips to create the teeth. I like the look of these single solid comic book style teeth, so I won't add any of the individual teeth yet, opting to separate the bottom and top jaw with a single line before moving on to adding my elf ears. This particular elf is going to be the knife wielding, recently launched from a cannon variety, so I'll make sure his ears are pulled back like he's traveling at a pretty good speed. Otherwise, a last bit of smoothing with some isopropyl alcohol and a teeny tiny brush, and I can put him with the other elf heads I sculpted off camera, and it's into the oven with them while I get back to my freshly baked Santa head. At this point, Santa's head is nice and hard and ready for a body. I'm going to approach Santa's body in a slightly different way than I normally do, in that I'm going to completely make his lower half before I even get started on his upper body. I figure there's going to be a lot going on up top, so if I can really make sure his legs are extra stable, then that'll probably help me in the long run. With that being said, once I've covered his legs in a thick layer of aluminium foil, I can start from the bottom and work my way up by making his black leather combat boots first. I'll then wrap said aluminium legs in an extra thick layer of red clay, and once I've built it up enough so that I've got a nice solid slab of red leg meat, I can pinch the belt line to make fitting a belly in place a little bit easier later, and it's on to smoothing and blending the legs and cutting away the excess above the foot for future fur trim. I'll then work my way around the legs, pressing lots of little wrinkles into the legs to show that Santa's in a proper power stance before pushing the belt line back and trimming the top flat so I can fit a long black wormy dealy belt around the rim of the pants and join the ends to make one solid loop. I'll then take that bit I cut off and loop it up, cutting the excess off so it looks like the belt's been tucked in and it's hanging down the front. A little golden horseshoe will be the belt loop, and after poking some holes I can fit a little hook in place. A quick go around with the ball stylus will extend the belt line out for a big fat future belly, and I can finish off the lower half by wrapping the bottoms of the pants in a bunch of white wormy dealies that I'll poke with a stiff nylon brush so they look like fluffy white wool. Otherwise, with that, Santa's power bottom is fully built, so it's time to get on to making his upper half. I'll wrap a long length of armature wire around an oversized aluminium egg before pushing the legs to the back and covering my shiny silver egg in a thick layer of clay. I'll then add a fleshy sausage to one side of Santa's belt line so I can fit the body egg on a slight tilt before pressing Santa's big, bald, beardless head in place. I'll refine the shape of Santa's shirtless gut, adding some folds to the belt line where his big jolly belly is spilling over his pants before thickening up his moobs and smoothing it all together. Once I've rolled his rotundity relatively flat, I can poke a little hole for his belly button and slap some little Santa nipples up top, then it's into the oven to bake, so I can build his big red coat. To make said coat, I'll start with a slab of red smashed flat, that I can then cut down into a couple coat-shaped shapes that I didn't really measure beforehand, so there's every possibility that they won't really fit. However, through the power of editing, I was able to hide all my previous attempts, and it looks like I nailed it on the first try. Of course, there's still a bit of skin showing in the back, so I'll cover it all up with some more slabs of red clay, connecting it to the suave open jacket in the front, building it up and blending it in until all the skin is covered and the fabric looks like there's some ripples and folds hanging down. I then smooshed an extra long wormy dealy extra flat so I can loop it around the coat, covering the edge all the way around, adding some little bits on the sides so it looks like the woolly trim completely covers the exposed edge. Finally, a quick pokey with that nylon brush will turn the soft, smooth clay into a lovely, textury, woolly clay texture thing. Before I bake the body again though, I want to wrap another belt over Santa's shoulder so he can carry his ammunition bag full of elves on his back while keeping his hands free to reload. Otherwise, with that in place, I can bake the body again to save my progress before bending the arms into an appropriate position and covering them in a layer of aluminium foil followed by more red clay. I'll then smooth and blend this into the cured clay of the coat and add all the necessary wrinkles, but this time, before I bake the body, I'm gonna need to make a cannon. This is an aluminium roll, and it's the perfect size for a Christmas cannon. Once I've snipped the tip off, I can wrap it in a layer of clay and cut the excess away, leaving one end open while capping the other. Then it's just a case of building up the body of the cannon until it's slightly cartoonish in shape, at which point I can pop it into the oven to harden it, before breaking out my sandpaper to give it a nice smooth surface. Once it's nice and smooth, I can un-nice and smoothify it by using some files and a knife to chop away at the lovely smooth surface, adding lots of pitting and scratches and damage. With that though, my cannon is done and ready to be fit in place on Santa's shoulder. At this point, all that's left to do then is make some hands. I'll make my hands by taking a little white lump of clay and squishing it into a flat egg-shaped shape that I can cut some fingers into before fitting a thumb onto the underside, refining the shape of the palm, and adding knuckles and gnarly bits where necessary. I'll then repeat this process a second time to create the other hand, at which point I can fit them into their predetermined hand holes on the arms. However, like all the steps prior, before I can bake it, I need to build some sort of accessory, and this time that accessory is a little lady elf about to be loaded into a cannon. Since all my elves are going to be angry little monsters, I want to make it look like she's struggling against Santa's grip, so I'll add a little armature wire wrapped around her metal spine before building up her body. Once I've got an anatomically correct elf torso, I'll add some little green pants and a teeny tiny green bra before removing Santa's hand from his arm so I can more easily fit this little elf onto his outstretched palm. I'll bend her little arm so it looks like she's fighting against Santa's grip, but more so in a manner that implies she's more interested in getting to the stabbing now, and waiting to be loaded into a cannon is gonna take too long. Once I've added her teeny tiny hands grabbing Santa's fingers, I'll fit some little black elf boots in place and curl the tips up before fitting the hand back onto Santa's arm so I can clean everything up a bit more easily. Finally, I can wrap the forearm in a little lump of woolly white clay, and that's Santa mostly finished, which means it's time to get the rest of the elves sorted out. I built another entire angry elfin body with a thin layer of dark flesh-colored clay since I wanted this guy to be hanging onto Santa's shoulder swinging a plank of wood with nails. So once I've bent his body into the correct position for the shoulder, I'll add his shoes and give him some teeny tiny green shorts before wrapping the exposed wire of his arm in a thin layer of brown clay and cutting it down so it's got a vaguely woody shape. The tips of some toothpicks will be the nails, and it's on to making Santa's ammo bag. And by that, of course, I mean his present bag, but like filled with angry little elves waiting to be loaded into his cannon. Which, of course, means I need to make a little bag and fit at least a couple of elves on top before wrapping a length of white wool around the edge and cinching it tight. That way you can't actually see into the bag, so you'll just have to take my word that it's full of little elves jostling for the right to be the first to be launched towards a hapless victim. I'll then wrap this bag in more red clay before covering Santa's back in some cling film so I can press the bag in place while still being able to easily remove it so I can finish adding the detail and to make painting it easier later. I'll then finish off the elves by adding some little hands here and there in the hopes that it will look like the little elf in the front is being shoved down by the one in the back while she clambers on top of him to get to the top of the bag and into the fight. Finally, the last little elf is going to be the one being fired from the cannon, so I won't bother making his legs. However, I will give him a little knife handle that I can attach a blade to later. Then it's back to Santa, where I can finally paint his face and head with a layer of bacon bond so I can slap some white clay on top of his dome to build up his big, beautiful white locks, as well as build out his big, bushy eyebrows, before finally adding his big, bushy beard. Once I've refined the shape of the beard and added lots of little flowy lines, I'll add each side of his oversized mustache before working my way up to the top of his head, adding texture to his eyebrows and hair, where I'll smoosh a big red conical hat on top using the flat of a sculpting tool to make it look a little more natural. Then once I've got the shape looking ship-shape, I'll wrap the rim in some more fluffy white clay, then I can repeat this process with all the elves, to give each of them their own conical Christmas hat, but this time in green. Otherwise, with the hat in place, the only thing left to do then is glue the blade onto the knife, and that's this little Christmas miracle finally fully sculpted and ready for a little highlighting. I'll start by working my way across the pale flesh tone faces, adding little touches of slightly darker red washes to the recesses of all the wrinkles and skin folds before doing the same with the darker flesh tone faces, but with appropriately darker brown washes. I'll then come back with some lighter shades of either pale pink flesh tones or darker brown flesh tones on a sponge to tie the various shades together. With the fleshy bits finished, I can turn my attention to the larger sections, painting all the red bits with a heavy red wash that I'll then speed up the drying process using a heat gun, which will leave little splotches and ink stains to make Santa's outfit look a little more worn, before coming back with a lighter red dry brushing to bring out some of the edges. Moving on to the cannon, I've mixed up some metallic paint with a little burnt umber ink to create a sort of a weathered brass look that works well for this style of cannon, before moving on to the bandolier, which I'll give an initial light leather brown that I then decided on to be black to match the other belt. To make it look a little more worn though, I'll sponge some lighter grays and brush a couple of other shades of gray over the top before giving both the belts and the boots a black wash to bring all those colors together. I can then give the gold buckle a little gold buckle gold so it looks a bit more gold, and it's on to painting all the green bits of the elf fabric with an initial heavy green wash followed by a lighter green highlighting by way of dry brush. Finally, once I've got all the colors in place, I'll work my way around each of the models, cleaning up the white trim wherever I've painted outside the lines and spilled a little color onto the trim. However, I don't want it to be too pristine, so I won't worry too much about getting a solid white. For artistic reasons, of course, not because I'm lazy. I'll then paint the wooden plank with a couple shades of brown to add some variation, and I can paint the nails with an irony gunmetal gray and the knife with a bit of a silver. Then it's back to the faces, where I'll flood the mouths with a light red wash and paint all the teeth with a gnarly sepia wash before rimming each of the eyes in a dark red. By the time I've worked my way around each of the eyes, rimming them in red, the mouths and teeth should be dry enough that I can start to clean up the teeth either by painting individual teeth in Santa's mouth or painting the little teeth in place of the big single tooth on each of the elves. Once that's done, the red rims are dry enough that I can start to clean up the inside of the eyes with a bit more white, though I had considered leaving the elves with unsettlingly red eyes, but figured they looked a little bit too vampiric at that point. For Santa, I'll start by giving him some big black dots in the center of each eye that I can then cover with a soft blue iris, followed by a dark black pupil in the center, before finishing it off with some white shiny dots. The elves, on the other hand, will just get some basic black pupils dead center in each eye, which I think is probably enough for them. Otherwise, once that's had a chance to dry, I can give each eye and all the mouths and teeth plenty of high gloss varnish so they're nice and goopy, and that's the painting finished, which means it's time to figure out how to make this knife elf fly. And to do that, I've soldered a little spaghetti LED to a battery pack. This way I can use a little hot glue to stick an appropriately sized steel tube to the top of the battery pack, which will let me wrap the LED around the outside while the little elf's armature wire will fit inside. A little hot glue will hold the LED in place, as well as let me attach some cotton wool over the LED and act as the smoke from the cannon, and a little more hot glue will attach this little clay half pipe that I made to fit inside the cannon, which will ensure the battery pack fits snugly. A gentle blasting of the cotton with some black from the airbrush will make it look sooty and smoky, and that's my little cannon blast ready to be fit in place. All that's left to do then is build a base for Santa to stand on, which I'll make out of this little MDF disc that happens to have perfectly spaced holes for Santa's feet, probably since I drilled them moments ago off camera. Of course, a basic MDF base is a little basic and not based at all, so I'll pop Santa off the base and fill the holes with some little armature offcuts, then break out my favorite non-sponsored product, One Strike Filler. I'll mix this up with a little water so it's a little more watery, then I'll mix a bit of PVA glue in for strength and sticking power, and a little fake snow to give it a tiny bit of shine, then I can slap it onto the base, gently smoothing it out, but keeping a bit of texture so it looks a little snowy. Once I've got a nice smooth, snowy consistency, I can remove the metal pegs, then pop Santa down, pressing the snow in tight against his boots. Finally, with Santa in place, I can start attaching the various elves to their various attachment points, and that's us done here and on to the Glamour Shots. As always, a big old thank you to the fine folk over on Patreon, and a special hey how are you to the newest of them: Joel Croker, Addie Waring, Rel, Jason Artie Fox, Merry Christmas Caleb, Average Assassin, Broads, Unholy Savage, Lou Julia, Cynthia Jen, Lars Strandon, Vanessa Rose, HBD Rohan, Bianca Fowler, and Ian with an E is a fruity little man. You are the old-timey cannon that spews forth the angry knife-wielding elves that something this channel. If you like this video, then hey, why not share it with everyone you know? And if you didn't like this video, then I'm sorry, I guess, and you can write a strongly worded letter to YouTube to let them know why. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Cheers.